My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. It's hard to believe that our time with Rugrats is almost over. For so long, this series pretty much carried Nickelodeon when it came to video games. But now the sun is setting and the torch is being passed on to other Nicktoons. Rugrats Royal Ransom was the final home console Rugrats game, and next week's review of Rugrats Go Wild is the final game based on the original series. All Grown Up ran for 5 seasons, but never really reached anywhere near the heights of the original series, resulting in just a single game being developed based on the teenage babies. Royal Ransom is also notable for being the final Nick game released in 2002. Hitting store shelves on November 26, this marked the 12th game based on a Nick show released in 2002. 5 of those games were released in the span of a single month. It's truly incredible how the video game industry used to operate when it came to licensed properties. The idea of releasing these titles outside of the holiday period was basically taboo. From this game's release until September of the following year, there was just a single Nick game released, and that was purely because the Rugrats Go Wild film released in May. Coming to both the PS2 and GameCube, Royal Ransom was developed by Avalanche Software, who have already popped up to develop the less than stellar Rugrats in Paris home console game. The studio is probably most known for being the creatives behind the first 3 TAC games, but more recently they've been in the spotlight as the developer for Hogwarts Legacy. Unfortunately for Avalanche, their second attempt at Rugrats doesn't seem to have impressed critics. The 5.2 average review score it ended up with firmly places it amongst some of the worst Rugrats games released. Search for Reptar and Studio Tour was solid, but home console Rugrats games have struggled outside of that. What can Royal Ransom bring to the table?
Now with my magic wand of power. And that means you dumb babies are my loyal suspects.
Once again, the babies have wild imaginations narrative has been employed to give us an interesting Rugrats game. However, this time things aren't entirely left up to their imagination. Stu has gone absolutely insane and built what can only be described as an abomination in the Pickles' backyard.
What's he building in there? What the hell is he building in there?
The neighbours have to be fuming over this monstrosity. Imagine waking up one day and a 100-foot tall castle is just staring down at you. So yeah, the kids have a legit castle to run around in addition to their overactive imaginations. Naturally, Angelica decides the castle is hers, so it's up to Tommy and Co to kickstart another revolution by sending her oppressive ass to the guillotine. Initially, you start out playing as Kimmy, which is kind of a unique choice for the specific character to drop you in as. Pressing B at this herd of babies will change your character though, allowing you to choose any of the regular crew. There's no difference in playstyle or anything, so the choice purely comes down to whichever character is your favourite. Before even getting into the castle, the Pickles' backyard and house are explorable, but it feels a little off. Running inside the house, the layout is just so foreign. I don't remember Tommy's house ever looking like this. You'll quickly find yourself bored of this limited environment, so you head towards the castle, which apparently requires payment to get into. The coins you've seen scattered about are used for this. Whenever you fail a level, you're kicked back here, and you essentially have to pay 100 coins for another life. To teach the player about this and not make the mechanic too much of a pain initially, you're given 500 coins. This is a really weird and, need I say it, unnecessary addition to the game. All it really adds is the possibility of getting stuck. If you spend all your coins, you can't get back into the castle. To combat this, you can collect coins in the backyard, but depending on how many you have, there might not be enough. Getting around this results in you having to save, quit, and then re-enter, where the coins will have respawned. It's so unnecessary and it's a real sign of things to come. Avalanche were obsessed with you collecting items to use as currency in this game. Alongside the coins, you'll also receive big batteries for beating levels. Once you collect enough of these, you gain access to new floors of the castle. Then on top of that, you'll find small batteries and dollar bills scattered around levels. This is unnecessarily confusing. Your coins are purely used for buying access to the castle, so the second form of money allows you to buy mini games that can be played with friends and stuff like that. It's a pretty superfluous addition, all things considered. After you've tried to wrap your head around all that, you'll find yourself actually playing the game, where it quickly becomes apparent that Avalanche took most of their inspiration from Nintendo 64 style 3D platformers. Levels are a mix of 3D platforming, vehicle and race segments. It's all pretty stock standard stuff for any player that has picked up one of these kind of games before. The wheel definitely hasn't been reinvented here for the gameplay. While the inspiration is clear, Avalanche attempted to put their own spin on the structure of these games, and the final result is one of the most awkwardly put together games I've had the displeasure of playing. I mentioned the small batteries found in levels. What do these do? Well, for the first 30 minutes or so, I had no clue whatsoever. You'll discover their use with a massive thud soon enough. Collecting these is mandatory to progress. Every single level in Royal Ransom has a battery price tag you need to pay. Some sort of explanation of this would have been welcome. It's so easy to brush the batteries off as unimportant when the dollar bills aren't crucial. Knowing that I need to collect small batteries should be laid out before you even start. Gatekeeping certain areas behind some sort of requirement is pretty normal in these style of games. In Mario 64, you're forced to have a certain amount of stars if you want to progress deeper into Peach's castle. Royal Ransom copies that, with players needing to win big batteries to unlock new floors of the castle, but then they take it a step too far and apply the same logic to individual levels. The individual levels are this game's equivalent to the specific stars in Mario 64's courses. Imagine how clunky that game would be if every time you wanted to attempt a new star, you had to pay some sort of price. It's just nuts. All it results in is an inevitable wall for the player to hit, that can only be knocked down by grinding levels you've already played. It doesn't help that the game is so stingy with batteries. You'll be able to collect 4 batteries at most in a level, with most levels only having like 2 or 3. These batteries don't respawn either, and they're hidden pretty well in most levels rather than handed to you. When you take all of this into account and the fact that every single level in the game costs multiple batteries to enter, it just becomes a slog. To use as few batteries as possible, I started only playing the levels with the smallest requirement. This meant I was only playing the levels with a 2 battery asking price, and eventually a 3 battery asking price when I progressed deeper into the game. Then we arrive at the next awkward bit of structuring from Avalanche. I unlocked access to the final level after playing what felt like only half the levels. It is genuinely bizarre to be able to waltz up to the final level and beat the game while simultaneously being told, no, you haven't earned the right to enter Chucky's Dinosaur Fuckfest. It's like they saw games where you only needed to meet a minimum threshold to reach the final boss and were inspired to do something similar, but the game they were making didn't really jive with that design idea. This is definitely worsened because of the small battery nonsense. I'd imagine if I was spending more batteries on the levels asking for 3 or more, I would have covered more ground before getting to the end. "3D platforming is the most consistent style of gameplay thrown at you in Royal Ransom. Most of the time, you'll be doing multiple different challenges in the same environment in the vein of those Nintendo 64 platformers, and sometimes even the racing sections would be lumped into that environment too. The platforming controls are okay. Running and jumping feels solid in most situations, but it also feels like the game just doesn't recognize your inputs a lot of the time, particularly when it comes to double jumping. Controlling the camera is a pain too. 3D platformers struggled with this majorly at first, but Royal Ransom is next level. The camera won't automatically jump into the worst spot as much as some other games from around this time, but when it does, it's such a pain to get it back into a half-decent viewing angle. Pretty much everything you do while platforming is guided by a glowing orb of light. There's no real need to think when the orb is telling you what to do. Despite all the criticisms I've thrown at Royal Ransom so far, I have to admit I regularly found myself slipping into a groove where I was kinda digging it, but every time I was abruptly pulled out of that groove without fail, generally because of another one of Avalanche's crazy design decisions. A good example of this is in the previously mentioned Chucky's Dinosaur Fuckfest. Level's pretty simple. Bones are scattered around a big level and you need to ride a dinosaur to retrieve them and place them back at a pile. Instead of just accepting the returned bones when you step on the pile or something similar that makes sense, Royal Ransom asks you to stand back and spit the bone into the pile. Barely missed the pile? Too bad, you've failed, you're a worthless piece of shit and your family has disowned you. It's just a needlessly clunky layer added on top of what could have been a fun level. Zooming around with the dinosaur was actually pretty cool. Basically every platforming level has something like this. They get 99% of the way towards putting together a fun level, then shoot themselves in the foot. I'd almost rather the game be a broken mess like the time I glitched under this hippo, instead of coming so close to being fun. When you're not participating in frustrating platforming levels, you'll be participating in frustrating vehicle sections and races. I'm not exaggerating when I say every one of these is awful. Well, I guess the snow race and the magic carpet ride are passable, but the rest are horrid. The boat race was the very first thing I played in the game, and it made me come so close to turning it all off. Controls are ridiculously loose here, and they really cheaped out on the level. There's one track that you race 3 times. The only change up is that you go through the track backwards in your second race. Flying this plane around in the circus area hurt my soul. Your objective is to shoot all of these clowns, but the plane controls sloppily, and the aiming of your shots is unbelievably bad to the point where you're forced to be an inch away just to land anything. The submarine section has such a clunky control scheme that was breaking my brain. Avalanche went for a quirky setup where pressing up and down will change how deep in the water you are, while also having a separate accelerate button that will fling you forwards. Your goal is to pick up a few treasure chests and drop them in a net, with plenty of enemies and hazards placed in your path. In the end, none of that actually matters because this level completely overlooks the fact that I can rise straight up to the surface where there are no hazards. The very last level is a vehicle section too. You storm Angelica's castle with a catapult that you drive around. On paper, it sounds like a pretty epic way to end the game, but it's a massive dud. All it consists of is driving onto pressure plates, which lower a gate and allows you to shoot down a door. You do this a handful of times and then the game just ends. I didn't have a shootout with Angelica or get to see a cutscene where I had thwarted her. It just cut to it all being over, to my supreme disappointment. It should be noted that while the game holds your hand in terms of where to go in the platforming levels, there are some absurd difficulty spikes at times. For a game aimed at kids, it's brutally unforgiving, but I don't think it's deliberate. A lot of my setbacks in this game regularly came back to jankiness, awkward design, or occasionally glitches. When you combine this with the roadblocks regularly put up due to the whole battery fiasco, you've got a whole lot of frustration simmering here. Graphically, Royal Ransom is a mixed bag, like pretty much every other aspect. The game is bookended by 2 meaty cutscenes, but those are the only cutscenes you get for the entire game. As you're storming the castle, it's just level after level after level. The cutscenes also have this weird border, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why it's there. It can't have been because the devs thought it looked good, because it's super ugly. I'm thinking it had something to do with the performance side of things. And while I love that they went in depth with the 2 cutscenes we get, the visual style they use here is radically different to what we've seen in cutscenes previously. I found that the Rugrats home console games have done a great job at recreating such a weird 2D art style in 3D. Here they depart from that style and it's not for the better. Characters almost look like they're claymation and have strange rubberiness and fluidity to them. I really dislike this look. When you jump into the gameplay, the models look a lot like the models from Avalanche's Rugrats in Paris game that released a couple years earlier. It really wouldn't surprise me if they were reused. It's not a bad thing though, because I think those models look pretty good. When you take into account the environments and the scope of some of the levels, I'd say Royal Ransom is the best looking home console Nick game of this era so far. Boy Genius, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman and Beach Bandits were all similar sort of games to this, but all look significantly worse. The presentation aspect I disliked the most was the overabundance of inane chatter from the characters. These babies do not shut up.
You babies are gonna be cream pie.
I've often cited the lack of voice acting in games I've reviewed or been mercilessly attacked for not bringing it up in the case of Nick Kart Racers 2, but if this is the alternative, I'll gladly have all of the characters be mute. Put this game down for 5 seconds in the hub world and you'll have Susie, who is the game's narrator / guide, Angelica, and whichever baby you've selected all yelling over each other. I almost would have preferred the game to play out to the sounds of an actual baby crying.
gotta get me some new babies. These ones are getting too smarty pants for my own good.
I've been really harsh on Rugrats Royal Ransom, and for good reason. This really isn't a good game. The frustrating thing is, the aspects that make Royal Ransom a bad game can easily be removed or fixed. The awkward construction and lack of cohesion for the game's structure account for the overwhelming majority of issues. I can very easily see an alternate reality where I look back on this as a fun little Rugrats themed love letter to 3D platformers on the Nintendo 64. Instead, by the end of it, I was just done. I didn't even have the slightest bit of motivation to seek out the levels I skipped over, mostly because it would have meant I'd need to grind batteries to access them, despite literally beating the game. Next week will be another Rugrats review with a sprinkling of Wild Thornberrys. Rugrats Go Wild is in theaters, so there needs to be a video game companion. Almost every Nickelodeon movie tie-in game has been horrendous so far, and I don't have a whole lot of hope that this will be the entry to buck the trend. To make sure you catch that review and the ever-approaching release of Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, hit the subscribe button.